Hello, I'm Nicholas Backfish, and this is Motivating an ADHD Child in a School Setting. My first strategy for motivation is to cut out negative talk. Perception is reality when it comes to self-image. What we hear and say affect what we think about ourselves. This can become a self-fulfilling prophecy when we think we don't have the ability to do something, therefore we don't try hard at doing it. This lack of effort makes us fail, and the failure reinforces our ability that we are unable to do something. This is linked to causal attribution theory, which believes that humans innately search for causes for why things happen. Just as I said, perception was very important. The perceived cause is more important than the actual cause in causal attribution theory. And there are three loci of causal attribution theory: the locus of causality, the locus of stability, and the locus of controllability. The locus of causality concerns whether you perceive a cause as your work or the work of others. The locus of stability concerns whether a cause can change over time or whether it stays the same. An example of an unstable cause would be effort, which can change over time. The locus of controllability concerns whether one can or cannot control the chief cause to which they attribute a success or failure. An example would be attributing a failure to bad luck, which is uncontrollable. The second strategy for motivation is to maintain high expectations. Children are smarter and more perceptive than most people know. They know when little is expected of them, and they attribute those low expectations to perceived low ability on their part. Conversely, high expectations are attributed to their own high ability. This can be counterintuitive in maintaining high expectations of low achievers, but it does show results, such as those in my own personal experience. I'm a substitute teacher for Gwinnett County Public Schools. I regularly fill in for teachers in the special education department, and one Friday in September, I was a substitute for an algebra resource class. I was handing out a test in one period, and one of the students said, quote, "I ain't doing that," as I handed her test to her and proceeded to put her head down on the desk. Once I finished passing out the rest of the tests, and had made sure the students were working with only a pencil and calculator, I asked the young lady to accompany me out into the hallway to talk. I was worried she would refuse because of the confrontational attitude she had displayed earlier, and I did not want to disturb the rest of the class. However, rolling her eyes, she got out of her desk and came out into the hallway with me. I explained to her that the test was a large portion of her grade, and not doing it would have an outsized impact on her final grade. She responded that she knew that, but still was not going to do the test. I asked her why, and she said, "Because I don't want to." I thought for a moment, and then asked her if she believed she was not going to do well on the test. She responded that she was bad at math, and, quote, "That's why I'm in this class, isn't it?" End quote. I told her she was in the class because it was the learning environment that best suited her individual needs, and that she was not placed in the class because of any scores on any math tests. I asked her if I could leave the teacher a note explaining the situation, and if she could, in the meantime, attempt to do anything on the test that she could. She agreed and submitted a test that was about 75% finished at the end of the period. This was a textbook example of girls being more likely to attribute negative outcomes to lack of ability. It is also a textbook example of the negative aspect of separating students by ability. It is true that students in special education classes, especially resource classes, may need longer times to do tests, smaller class sizes, and more attention from teachers. However, it also makes them think lower of their abilities to put them in these classes. My third strategy is baby steps. Breaking a larger goal into smaller, more easily achieved goals makes the task overall less daunting. This is especially true for students with ADHD. I myself have ADHD, and a task seeming daunting or extremely large can be very, very off-putting and make me not want to start it at all. This also allows the student the feeling of achieving something more often. That hit of dopamine, that feeling of accomplishment, will make them want to do more. This is related overall to goals. The properties of goals are whether they are proximal, short-term, or distal, long-term, whether they are general or specific, such as getting into a good college or making an A on my next history test, whether they are assigned or self-chosen, which is self-explanatory, difficult or easy, again, self-explanatory, and the level of commitment one feels towards them. Now, separate from this is goal orientation and goal orientation theory. Goal orientation refers to why individuals engage in a task. It is not the same as goal setting, which is what we just talked about. People engage in a task to either demonstrate competence to others or to develop their own competence. In goal orientation theory, there is the performance orientation, which is demonstrating competence, and the mastery orientation, which is developing competence. Both of them can be further divided into approach and avoidance. Performance approach orientation is to demonstrate competence to others. The performance avoidance orientation is to avoid demonstrating incompetence to others. The mastery approach orientation is to develop competence for yourself. And the mastery avoidance orientation is to avoid misunderstanding or not learning a specific task. Generally, in teaching, we want to try to encourage the mastery approach, developing competence for oneself, orientation, and we want to avoid encouraging the performance avoidance, or avoid demonstrating incompetence to others, orientation. Avoiding demonstrating incompetence to others places a great deal of pressure and stress on the student and can lead to negative psychological outcomes, whereas the mastery approach makes them feel self-fulfilled. Regarding setting goals, I would like to recall a second personal experience. On the last day of the 2023-2024 school year, I had a conversation with a student. I was a long-term sub for the last month of school for a 9th grade biology teacher who had just given birth. They had already taken the district's assessment, and so on a few of the days, I gave small lessons in philosophy. This came about because some of the students saw I was reading Plato's The Republic and wanted to know what it was about and why it was important. As I said, their district assessments had already been completed, so I figured it couldn't hurt to take some class time to introduce them to the bedrock of Western philosophy. They were engaged and stated a desire for more, so Hegel, Schopenhauer, and Nietzsche followed. One of those students came in and put their head down and slept every day that I did not have a philosophy lecture, but was attentive and alert when I was lecturing about philosophy. They were in my 7th period, so they were the final exam that I administered last. After the bell rang on the final day of school, the student caught up with me in the hallway. They walked home, so did not need to catch the bus or go to the car rider line. They thanked me for teaching about philosophy, as it was something they had never been exposed to before, and had not known they were interested in. I responded sincerely that I believed everyone was interested in something, and that they just had to find out what that something is. They asked me to recommend some reading, so I did, warning them that if they weren't a regular reader, some of it may be a bit dry or overly verbose. I told him to start with Nietzsche, as he tends to write more accessibly and concisely. told them to finish one book by Nietzsche by the end of the summer, write down all the questions that arose while reading it, and bring those questions with them when school returned, and that I would be there. In giving the student one Nietzsche book to read, I was attempting to give them a goal that was achievable. I made the goal specific because, as Alderman says, specific goals result in higher performance than general goals. I chose Nietzsche and recommended some of his shorter books because I wanted it to be challenging yet realistic. This would allow him to not be overly daunted by the task, but also to have a feeling of achievement when he finally did finish it. Finally, I felt that a book naturally lends itself to setting proximal goals by its subdivision into chapters and further pages. In giving the student a goal that was proximal, specific, and challenging yet realistic, I gave them an opportunity to achieve and build their confidence. And I believe building children's confidence in their intellect is extremely important. If you're confident in your intellect, you're confident you will do well in school. And if you're confident you will do well in school, you will try. This leads me to my final strategy, having clear and specific goals. As stated before, specific goals result in higher performance than general goals. It is much easier to work toward get an A on my next history test than it is to get into a good college. What colleges are seen as good? What are the admission requirements to those colleges? What extracurriculars do they value? Do they value the ACT or the SAT? And how do you prepare for all of those things? All those can get very daunting, but just getting an A on the very next history test is easy to study for, you know what material to do, and it's much more achievable. To conclude this presentation, I would like to say that in teaching and parenting a child with ADHD, setting proximal, specific, and challenging yet realistic goals is one way to help them through school. Maintaining high expectations of their schoolwork and their work ethic, both at home and at school, will help them in their confidence and their belief about their ability. Specifically for teachers, within a class, try not to group by ability level. Don't have all the smart kids in one group and all the lower achieving kids in another group. Kids will pick up on that. They are perceptive. They will know that you expect little of them. For both parents and teachers, do not allow negative talk about intelligence or ability or work ethic, etc. This will become manifest. As I said earlier, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Focus on ways to cope with and overcome ADHD, as opposed to using it as an excuse. If we allow students to attribute their failure to their ADHD, and they know that their ADHD is something about themselves which they cannot change, this will discourage effort in the future. And finally, I would encourage teachers to care. To care for and empathize with students who have ADHD. I always performed better for teachers who I liked and who I knew liked me, and who were empathetic and sympathetic to my ADHD. Those who looked on me as a low achiever or as a problem child, I didn't perform for, because I figured that they already had their mind made up about me. Thank you for watching this. This is my works cited page, and have a good night.